Episode 24, titled Too Early to Win, Too Late to Know, was hands down one of the wildest and most insane installments of Bleach to date. Where to even begin? So much happens in this episode, and there is a plethora of changes and additions which really blew my mind. It is hard to contain my excitement as we had a phenomenal 4-minute flashback sequence featuring ICHIBE and Yhwach speaking 1000 years ago. We have changes being made to the Zero Division versus the Schutzstaffel, as well as loads of additions of dialogue throughout the episode which weren't included in the manga. It's an understatement to say that this is what we have been waiting for. Anime exclusive material which answers questions that fans have had for years even after the ending of the manga, as well as giving us hope that highly anticipated fights in the series will live up to their potential and not be rushed like how they were within the manga. I am super excited to discuss the new content that we have received within this week's episode, and going into my breakdown, I want you all to keep in mind that this episode is a teaser of what's to come in Core 3 and 4. From my estimates, the last two cores of Bleach promise to adapt half the amount of manga content per season, while also having anime only material for the other half. If the anime original content is anywhere near to what we have received within this episode, then we honestly have so much to look forward to. Episode 24 not only provides us with some incredible anime exclusive scenes, but we also have a complete change to the plot and how it unfolds in comparison to the manga. You can tell that they have made these changes as setup, and they are planning to further expand upon them during the finale of Core 2 next week. I believe that this was one of the key aims of this episode, and honestly speaking, I think that the anime staff really exceeded with what they set out to do. The episode begins with a flashback from 1000 years ago. Following this, we get mostly material from chapter 597 to 601 adapted and reworked into the anime, with some content from chapter 588 and 604 also being included. This episode follows the Zero Division confronting Yhwach, HASCHWALTH and URYU, while also following Ichigo and the others as they prepare to be launched into the sky to the Royal Palace. So with a basic overview of this episode and what things we have to look forward to, in this video I want to discuss the pacing of the episode, as well as go over the anime exclusive scenes and the changes that they have made in comparison to the manga. I'm also going to be going over some of the staff who have contributed to this latest installment of Bleach. Now make sure that you stick around until the end of this video, because I'll be explaining the precedent that this week's episode has established for what we can expect from Core 3 and 4. So without further delay, here are my thoughts on the all new episode of Bleach's 1000 Year Blood War arc anime. Episode 24 marks what I believe to be the beginning of the next phase of the Bleach anime. We have always had anime original scenes, but they were mostly supplementary scenes that served to better our understanding of the story. They were firmly rooted to the events that had taken place within the manga, but this episode does the unprecedented. It completely alters the events of the manga, and it opens the door for what is essentially a brand new experience. A new and improved version of the 1000 Year Blood War arc, one that has Kubo's signature writing all over it, and a version that aims to right some of the wrongs from the manga counterpart, which admittedly started to feel heavily rushed during these sections of the story. The episode begins with an incredible anime original scene that centers around a conversation between Yhwach and ICHIBE, but before that we do get a glimpse of Yhwach's original Quincy Empire of Light, and despite it being a century old, it still looks absolutely glorious. I'd almost mistaken it for the Soul Society until I had noticed the architectural differences. The fact that it could be mistaken for the Soul Society highlights just how massive their nation had looked. This brief image of the former Quincy Empire gives us so much context to the Quincy struggle. What I'm referring to, of course, is Yhwach's speech from episode 14 about how they were almost exterminated and had been forced into hiding. This speech hits so much harder after being shown the original glory of the Quincy Empire. The Empire of Light wasn't just some small castle in the middle of nowhere, it was a full-blown nation, and a massive one at that. You can tell that it extended even beyond the walls we see surrounding its citadel. This image truly drives home the tragedy of what had happened to the Quincy, because this is the same nation that had been exterminated by the Soul Society. What is left of this once great empire is what becomes the modern day Silburn. After piecing all of it back together, it looks like the desolate, frozen buildings that have replaced the Soul Society are remnants of this glorious empire. I just think that that brief clip is an amazing piece of visual storytelling, and it's an excellent way to begin this exclusive scene. Continuing on, there appears to be an attempt at a peace talk between the representatives of the Shinigami and the Quincy. Ichibe represents the Shinigami, while Yhwach of course is shown to represent the Quincy. Yuha is considerably younger in this conversation. He looks almost indistinguishable from Old Man Zangetsu. His hair is also significantly shorter, and it's really cool that we see Hugo, Argola, and Zedritz standing by his side acting as his guards. These are Quincy who died later on during the war with the Soul Society, and they're characters that Royd remembers during the battle with Yamamoto, when he mimics Yhwach's body and his memories. There's also a new Quincy girl that we haven't seen before who uses guns for some reason, but this is a really interesting detail because we assumed that Yhwach's Quincy had only started using modern weaponry after they had went into the shadows, but this scene proves that Yhwach's Quincy's were always very open-minded with what kind of weaponry they had used, and they weren't restricted to just bow and arrows. Returning back to Yhwach and Ichibe, outside of the peace Ichibe was trying to establish between the Shinigami and the Quincy, he had mentioned the unification of the Quincy with the Empire of Light, which means that Soken's branch of old-fashioned traditional Quincy had existed even in Yhwach's time, and they were seemingly at odds with each other. This is actually supported by the manga because it was an internal war between the Quincy that had destroyed Basby's home, specifically a clash between Yhwach's Empire of Light and another different Quincy kingdom. So it would seem that this interaction had taken place before Yhwach had started to conquer other Quincy nations in order to build his Sternritter army, which he had used to go into war with the Soul Society and the original Gotei 13. One aspect of this flashback that I really love is the way that Yhwach is depicted here, because he has nowhere near the aura that he has as an adult. He lacks that intimidation factor because he is inexperienced. He isn't as knowledgeable as the Yhwach that we have come to know within the present timeline, and we even see him express wonder and confusion at some of the things that Ichibe tells him. This is the one time within all of the story where we don't see Yhwach act like he's 5 million steps ahead of everyone else, and it's really refreshing to see. During his brief scuffle with Ichibe, it is clear that he for once doesn't have the upper hand in the situation. This is a really new side of his character that we wouldn't have seen if not for this scene, and I couldn't be more grateful to Kubo and the staff for including this in the anime. This scene also raises some interesting questions about what kind of other powers Ichibe may have. When Yhwach activates the Almighty, Ichibe appears to possess an almighty eyeball of his own, but it's on the palm of his hand. He appears to use this in order to offset the power of Yhwach's Almighty. It is implied that Yhwach was inexperienced with the power of the Almighty at this point in the story, which is why Ichibe was able to seal it, which makes total sense and is consistent with the idea that Yhwach is really young here and he is inexperienced, and most likely he doesn't know how to properly utilize his own Shrift ability yet, thus explaining why he was so susceptible to allowing Ichibe to seal his power. Another amazing thing about this scene is that it confirms how Yhwach had lost his Shrift ability for over 1,000 years, meaning that all of his achievements going into the 1,000-year Blood War arc was done without the foresight of the Almighty, which is incredible to imagine, because even master planners like Aizen never got as far as Yhwach did with his plans. I think it would be impossible to shower this scene with enough praise that it deserves. I might have to make a separate video just going over all of the nuance and context that it gives us to better understand the final arc of Bleach. Without a doubt, it was an amazing addition and I loved these first 4 minutes of the episode. The scene also establishes that Ichibe was also treacherous, because by the end of their talk, it seems as though the main reason that he had gone to see Yhwach was probably to seal the almighty power that he has. I'm guessing that he agreed to speak to Yhwach in order to assess how much information he had known, and then after learning that he had possessed the almighty Shrift, he had acted quickly in order to get rid of it. It's interesting to note that Yhwach hadn't gathered his army of Soul King body parts just yet, because what Ichibe had used to seal the almighty had greatly resembled the Sternritter Pernida. This may mean that it's only after his almighty was sealed that Yhwach had met with the other fragments of the Soul King's body. This scene reveals so much information to us, and it's crazy how it manages to achieve this while only being 4 minutes long. It serves as a perfect answer to the age-old question of how Yamamoto was able to beat Yhwach if he had the almighty 1,000 years ago, and now we finally understand how it was possible. It's because Ichibe was able to remove the threat of the almighty from the equation, thus handicapping Yhwach when he had first gone into battle the original Gotei 13. This 4-minute scene is just something spectacular, and I couldn't be more grateful for it. You can definitely expect me to make a standalone video on this scene alone before the finale of Core drops, so stick around to the channel by subscribing so you don't miss it. Following the opening song, the episode continues from where we had left off from last week, starting with a slightly altered version of the manga's events. Contrary to the manga, it's Senjumaru who comes to greet the invaders. She looks amazing as usual, and she arrives with an army of the Soul King's soldiers. We then transition to see Ichigo and the others getting ready to take off for the Soul King's palace. They are joined by Ganju in another very light-hearted scene, and this is yet another sign that this episode, just like episode 22 and 23, is meant to be a setup for the upcoming finale, which is why not all of the comedic scenes have been cut from the episode. There's also another nice additional scene where after they take off, we see multiple characters in the Soul Society watch as they fly into the unknown. We get very cool shots of Renji, Bazbi, and Rukia, as well as Byakuya and even Robert, who's laying on the ground defeated. Robert's position on the ground looks like he's a man in the middle of an existential crisis, and I found it unintentionally hilarious. Shunsui, of course, is making himself useful as he's still standing in the same place that he has been in since episode 14, and while that may seem awkward to some, it's actually a really nice reminder of his role in the war as the captain commander. He has the highest vantage point, which allows him to survey the entire terrain and give orders to his men accordingly. Now, considering that he's been up there sending orders and rerouting his men time and time again, I think that's a really cool way of adding to the war atmosphere. Mairi also sees the launch and he comments on its lack of coordination, and of course Mairi is the only character who gets any lines during this scene, because he is Kubo's favourite character after all. When we return to the royal palace, we get a brief but much appreciated fight between the Soldat and the Soul King's soldiers. If there's one thing that this adaptation has excelled at, it's showing us the proper scale of this war. It feels more than just a bunch of our favourite characters fighting some villains. This feels like a real war and a true showing of a clash of military might. This is something that I feel was mostly missing from the manga version, and it's great to see it here in the anime. We then get what is a mostly loyal adaptation of the battle between Senjumaru and Nyanzol. It's a brief segment that does what it needs to, and there's not a whole lot to say about Nyanzol's fight. It's one fight that I was not hoping to see expanded upon, so I'm glad that they got it over quickly. Now, while talking about Senjumaru's moment with Yhwach, I find that the changes here do the manga a bit of disservice. Unlike in the manga where Yhwach climbs the stairs and completely ignores Senjumaru, the fight instead takes place at the entrance point where Yhwach and the others arrive. They never go beyond the stairs, so we don't get to see Yhwach ignoring Senjumaru, which I found to be a really cool panel from the manga, but I feel that the episode makes up for it a million times over with how much that it brings to the table. Now, we return to Ichigo and the others while they are on the rocket, and we get another fantastic anime-only scene where the group discuss everything that is currently happening. Ganju, mid-conversation, speaks about how the Quincy had brought their entire castle to the Serete only to abandon it and now go to the royal palace. This conversation then transitions into a discussion about the nature of the Soul King. Yoruichi explains what we already know about him and explains that he's most likely their target. Chad then deduces that Yhwach is most likely planning to replace the Soul King, to which Ganju agrees. Ichigo also adds to the conversation as he refers to the visions that he had of the Soul King while in Irazu Sando, as he states that the Soul King may be too much of an important being to replace. This was yet again another amazing anime-only addition, which helps to expand upon the manga. While we the audience are fully aware of what is happening, our main characters have not been brought up to speed yet, so adding a scene where they're thinking for themselves and cleverly deducing what is happening in the Soul King's palace is absolutely fantastic. It's a great show of character agency that makes the main characters feel like real people instead of how it feels like within the manga, where they're being thrown around from one scene to the other. Scenes like this add so much to the characterization of these amazing characters, and I love that the anime staff and Kubo are including these things in the anime. It is stuff like this that is getting me excited for Core 3 and 4, because we are seriously going to be having so much more room for expansion, where hopefully scenes like this will be commonplace. We then return to the manga version of events where they discuss URYU and reminisce about their first journey to the Soul Society, but then the scene is spliced with a brief anime original scene that shows URYU at the royal palace as he stares into the distance. But URYU isn't just standing there, he appears to be doing something that causes his Quincy pendant to light up. We even see what appears to be Blut vein patterns moving across his eyeballs. If you pay attention here, this scene is foreshadowing an insane plot twist that occurs right at the end of the episode. Now, we eventually return to the royal palace and almost everything that we see here is taken straight out of the manga, as Senjumaru pulls off her massive illusion and the shoot Starfall are trapped in the cage, which is all in line with the manga until we start to notice a few subtle but very visible differences. It is after the cage is sprung that Tenjiro makes his first appearance onto the scene. This slight restructuring of events adds so much to his credibility as a threat. In the manga, he basically gets treated like a fodder goon and is mostly ignored by Yhwach until they reach Senjumaru. He unexplainably vanishes from the story until Uetsu calls him during his battle with Askin. He was handled in such an odd manner within the manga, but this slight change adds to his credibility a whole lot more. He actually shows up when all of Squad Zero assembles to take on the Schutzstaffel. I could even call his entrance really cool, which is not something that I'd ever think that I'd be describing Korinji as. Now, it is Uetsu who literally gets the spotlight with his introduction, and it's absolutely amazing, but this is where I started to panic, because from this point onwards, everything begins to play out exactly as it does within the manga. Uetsu effortlessly kills the entire Schutzstaffel as Yhwach watches, but then I realized something was off, because the fight was shorter than I remembered. That was when I realized that unlike the manga, Askin actually died after the second slash. He didn't get back up, and the entire fight between himself and Uetsu didn't happen. Instead, we got what appeared to be Yhwach, HASCHWALTH and URYU about to get attacked by all of Squad Zero. While all of this is going on, Yhwach and URYU remain completely silent. Now, I was wondering if Yhwach was going to now respond with Ashwalin like he did within the manga, but this wasn't the case. Yhwach quickly reaches for something in his cloak and he throws it through the spaces in the cage, as we then get a closer look at it and it is revealed to be a Quincy medallion. But this doesn't appear to be his own, since his medallion is still pinned onto his cloak. As the camera gets closer to the medallion, it is quickly replaced by Yhwach, who appears to have teleported outside of the cage. Now this shocks everybody who is present, even including HASCHWALTH, who also appears to have no idea of what has just happened. The medallion that was thrown through the cage falls to the ground where Yhwach was originally standing, meaning that someone in that cage switched the positions of Yhwach and the medallion. And while I'm not Sherlock Holmes, I think that it's pretty clear that this was URYU's doing. This scene was an early glimpse at the power of his Shrift ability, the Antithesis, which is absolutely insane that they have included this here. This scene follows up with the foreshadowing from before, where we see URYU staring off into the distance and doing something with his Quincy medallion, which was under his cloak, and he was using some ability with his eyes. We now know what URYU was preparing for. This means that URYU must have given his medallion to Yhwach sometime after we were shown that scene, which is why Yhwach appears to have two medallions. This is absolutely genius writing, and it only gets better from here. So Yhwach leaves and we get the interaction from chapter 604 where he challenges ICHIBE, and ICHIBE warns him to be careful mentioning his name so casually, which now serves as a callback to when ICHIBE had also said this to Yhwach 1,000 years ago. Another really cool thing is that while Squad Zero was shocked at Yhwach leaving the cage, they still don't appear to be too bothered, as Uetsu even says that this is to be expected from the king. They're all acting really cool, and it's a far cry from how they were portrayed within the manga, as they had a lot of shortcomings and some would even say that they were pathetic. This is where the episode wraps up on, as it leaves us on a cliffhanger for the ages. Overall, the episode had rather good pacing due to how much of an original spin that they put on the events of the manga. Nothing felt rushed or out of place within the episode, and that's where I believe that this episode's greatest strength shines, which is in its ability to use the manga as a guide in order to create its own path on how to tell the story. This episode's animation was the usual that we've come to expect, with the storyboard being done by Mr. Yoichi Fujita, and everything considered, it was a really good storyboard, though I think that this might be one of his less impressive ones, but it was still good nonetheless. The animation was also fine, and I wouldn't expect too much from it because this episode is meant to build up the hype on next week's finale, which I can assure you this much at least, that it's going to be absolutely fantastic. Well, that was episode 24, Too Early to Win, Too Late to Know. This was easily one of the best episodes from the new Bleach anime. We received loads of anime original scenes and lines of dialogue, and as a setup episode to the finale of Core 2, I have to admit that the anime staff exceeded our expectations this week. Episode 24 gave us an insight into the past of Yhwach and ICHIBE, explaining how he had lost his The Almighty Power, as well as his history with ICHIBE, which we had no idea about. These aspects of the story were implied within the manga, but I absolutely love that the anime is expanding upon these points. With 1 week remaining and 2 episodes left to go, what do you think that we can expect from the finale of Core 2 next week? I still have so much left to talk about because this episode completely diverges from the manga, but rest assured I will be covering every change and addition that has been made in my manga versus anime comparison video, which I am going to try my best to upload tomorrow. I'm beyond excited to see how Core 2 is going to wrap up, and it feels weird because anime only fans and manga readers are going into the finale blind as to what on earth is going to happen. I must say that it feels good to be experiencing the story of Bleach in a new and improved way, and I'm really looking forward to how Core 2 ends. Episode 25 promises to give us an all-new original fight between the Zero Division and HASCHWALTH and URYU. Going into Core 2, we had learned that Kubo had drawn 20 new pages worth of material, including a rough outline of new fights. I'm suspecting that these 20 new pages pages featured all new fight scenes for the Zero Division. I guess only time will tell, but I definitely want to see URYU and HASCHWALTH team up to fight the Zero Division. Now be sure to continue the discussion about episode 24 in the comments. I'm really looking forward to reading all of your thoughts. And lastly, thank you for making it to the end of this video, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow in my manga vs anime comparison video. If you enjoy my content, then you can support my channel through Patreon for as little as $1 a month, or even through YouTube by becoming a channel member. You will gain access to exclusive channel perks and a Discord server which I frequently use. So become a member of my Zero Division and be the first to know about my upcoming videos. And once again, thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.